at the request of one of the biggest sponsors of this channel, Avenir Dutch, he asked me if I would do a video just talking about the Revolutionary War, the American Revolutionary War a little bit. So I decided I would do that, and I thought I would do it in a unique way. So what I want to explore today, a little bit, not in too great a detail, are just some of the pretty cool connections that exist between some of the founding fathers and other influential people who were part of the American Revolutionary War, and those who participated and shaped the events of the American Civil War 70 years later. So I thought I would explore a little bit of that. Now, this is not a complete detailed record of every single one of those connections. For example, Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, had quite a few grandchildren and other descendants who participated in the American Civil War. So I'm only going to touch on just a couple of those just to give you a sense of those connections. So you won't see every single last connection, nor will I be exploring connections that exist between people in the Revolution and other parts of American history, because there are a lot of those. Those will be in other videos perhaps. But for now, just here are some of the really interesting things that I found in doing a little research about this topic. Of course, there can be no discussion about connections between the two wars without first talking about General Robert E. Lee, of course, the most well-known general from the American Civil War on either side. Robert E. Lee had a storied history that went back far beyond the Civil War. His father was Henry Lee III, who was many things in American history, among them a lieutenant colonel during the American Revolution. He was a delegate to the Continental Congress. He served in the United States Congress after the Constitution, as well as the 9th governor of the state of Virginia. During the Revolutionary War, he was best known as a cavalry commander who served faithfully, particularly in the southern part of the war, under General Francis Marion. But that is just one of Robert E. Lee's connections to the American Revolutionary War. Of course, Robert E. Lee's most famous historical connection to the Revolutionary War comes through his wife, Anna. See, George Washington, the father of our country, had no biological children of his own. However, he had stepchildren through his wife, Martha, who had been married once before. And one of Martha's grandsons actually was adopted by General Washington, George Washington Parke Custis. And it was Mr. Custis who owned Arlington House, which is famous today as being the home of Arlington National Cemetery. And most people think of it as Robert E. Lee's home. But he inherited that through his wife, who was the daughter of George Washington Parke Custis. It was through that family connection that Robert E. Lee then comes to be associated with Arlington House and is associated with the father of our country. Of course, while our first president had no biological children of his own, our second president, another one of our founding fathers, John Adams, did have multiple children, and it's through several of those children that John Adams has connection to the American Civil War. Of course, Adams is much more well known today than he was even a few years ago because of the fantastic HBO series John Adams, in which we see some of what he did for the nation even before it became a nation. He defends the British soldiers who were accused of murder during what became known as the Boston Massacre. A man of great integrity. He serves during the early stages of the war as one of the most prominent delegates to the Continental Congress. He's the man who seconds Lee's motion for independence. And he helps form the committee along with Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and a few others who draft the Declaration of Independence. But of course, John Adams also serves as an ambassador to multiple nations in Europe, including the Netherlands, France, and of course, most famously, ambassador to the United Kingdom. But more than that, he also serves then as President of the United States. And it's later in his life that he actually lives long enough to see his son, John Quincy Adams, also serve as the 6th President of the United States. Interestingly, the first two presidents not reelected to a second term were John and John Quincy Adams. Now, it's through John Quincy that we want to highlight just a couple of folks who had prominent roles in the American Civil War. First, John Quincy's son, Charles Francis Adams Sr., served as the United States ambassador to the United Kingdom for Abraham Lincoln during the American Civil War. Now, Charles's son, Charles Francis Adams Jr., who was born in 1835. He's a great-grandson of John Adams and a grandson of John Quincy Adams. Becomes a first lieutenant in the 1st Massachusetts Cavalry. By the time the 1st Massachusetts Cavalry served at the Battle of Gettysburg, he had risen to the rank of captain. And by the end of the American Civil War, he was actually a colonel in command of that regiment. So a prominent member of the Adams family. They've had a prominent history all throughout, and you can study on that and just see some of the connections they have even today. John Quincy Adams II was also a high-ranking officer during the American Civil War. He was older and so didn't serve in the field, but he did serve as a colonel on the staff of Massachusetts Governor John Andrew during the war. Now, there were others in the Adams family, but we're just trying to highlight some of the most prominent of them. Moving on to the 3rd president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, who of course was from the South, and so one would expect that most of his descendants, if they participated in the American Civil War, would have been on the Confederate side, and for the most part that's true. Thomas Jefferson Randolph, who was Thomas Jefferson's eldest grandson, was actually a colonel by commission in the Confederate Army, but he was born in 1792 and so was already about 70 years old by the time the war broke out. So he never actually went to the front, but he was a commissioned colonel. Now, the youngest of Thomas Jefferson's 12 grandchildren was George Wythe Randolph, who was born in 1818, very near to the end of his grandfather's life. George Wythe Randolph actually served briefly as the Confederate Secretary of War in 1862. But there is at least one connection to the Union Army on the Jefferson family tree, and that belongs to Major Philip Sidney Coolidge, who was actually a great-grandson of Thomas Jefferson. Major Coolidge actually was in command of the 1st Battalion of the 16th United States Infantry, 308 men, at the Battle of Chickamauga, where he, Major Sidney Coolidge, was killed in battle. Interestingly, the 16th United States Infantry has more than one connection to our founding fathers, because another officer who served with the 16th U.S. Infantry was a man by the name of Captain Francis Bash. Captain Francis Bash was a great-great-grandson of none other than Benjamin Franklin. His father, Hartman Bash, was also a member of the United States military. He was actually the Union Chief of Topographical Engineers, a 1818 West Point graduate who ended up at the end of the war as a brevet brigadier general, and he also happened to be married to the sister of Army of the Potomac commander General George Gordon Meade. Buried in the same cemetery as Benjamin Franklin, among others, is another of our founding fathers, a man by the name of Dr. Benjamin Rush. Now, Dr. Rush is not as well known as some of our other founding fathers, but was a good friend to many of the men we've already talked about. He was instrumental in reforging the friendship of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson after the bitter rivalry that existed during their presidencies. Benjamin Rush was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was a Surgeon General for the Continental Army, and later was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Well, Dr. Benjamin Rush's grandson was Colonel Richard Henry Rush, and you may not be familiar with his name, but you may be familiar with the unit that he commanded. He was in command of the 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry, which was otherwise known as Rush's Lancers during the Civil War. Well, another founding father by the name of Benjamin was Virginia planter and governor of Virginia, Benjamin Harrison V. He had signed the Declaration of Independence. He is the father of ninth President of the United States, William Henry Harrison, and the great-grandfather of 23rd President of the United States, Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison was not only a president, he was a United States Senator from Indiana, but during the American Civil War served as the commanding officer of the 70th Indiana Infantry, and then later on commanded a brigade in the Army of the Cumberland. We are in the home stretch. I've got just a few more to share with you in this particular video, but I just wanted to take a quick time out and ask you to please consider subscribing. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't already done so, and I hope you enjoy this video and others like it. If so, I will definitely be making more of these in the future. All right, back to the Founding Fathers. There are few quotes that are more well known from the time of the American Revolution than Patrick Henry's "Give me liberty" or "Give me death." On July 5th, 1776, the day after the adoption of the Declaration of Independence, Patrick Henry became the governor of Virginia, an office that he held two separate times. It was Patrick Henry's great-grandson, Colonel William Aylett, who was a captain in Company D of the 53rd Virginia Infantry. He steadily rose through the ranks until March of 1863, when he became the commanding officer and colonel of that regiment. He led the regiment in Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, and when his brigade commander, Lewis Armistead, was mortally wounded, he took over command of the brigade until he himself was wounded. Also at Gettysburg that day, leading a regiment in Pickett's charge, was Lieutenant Colonel Waller Tazewell Patton. Lieutenant Colonel Patton was killed when his jaw was ripped away by the fragments of a shell while leading his men as part of Pickett's division up the slopes of Cemetery Ridge that day. Colonel Patton also had an older brother, George S. Patton, Sr., who was killed a year later at the Third Battle of Winchester. Now, not part of this particular story is the fact that Colonel George Patton was the grandfather of World War II General George S. Patton. But for the sake of our story today, both George and Waller Patton were great-grandsons of Revolutionary War Brigadier General Hugh Mercer. Hugh Mercer was a good friend of General George Washington. He had come from Scotland, where he had helped lead part of the Jacobite uprising and commanded a brigade for General Washington, and was killed leading that brigade at the Battle of Princeton just about a week after the successful attack on Trenton. And in General Mercer's honor, to this day, there are 6 states here in the United States who have a Mercer County named in honor of General Hugh Mercer. Well, when you say the name Paul Revere, only one thing really comes to mind, and that is his famous midnight ride that he made along with another man to warn the militia in the countryside west of Boston that the British were coming for the guns at Concord. Well, Paul Revere, in addition to being a silversmith and a somewhat of a dentist who is said to have made one of George Washington's set of false teeth, Paul Revere also had 51 grandchildren. And among those 51 grandchildren were at least 3 grandsons who served in prominent roles in the Union Army during the American Civil War. One of those grandsons was Brigadier General Joseph Warren Revere, who served as a brigade commander for New Jersey Volunteers. 2 of the others that we are aware of, one is Dr. Edward Revere, who was an assistant army surgeon who was killed at the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862. Paul Joseph Revere, another one of Paul Revere's grandsons, was a colonel in command of the 20th Massachusetts Infantry who was killed in action at the Battle of Gettysburg. All right, well, we've made it to the home stretch, and who better to wrap things up with than probably America's most famous and trendy founding father right now, Alexander Hamilton. Obviously, Alexander Hamilton has a storied history of his own, and those of you familiar with the musical know a lot of that already, but he was a lieutenant colonel on the staff of General Washington. He only actually took field command at the very end of the war when he led a battalion in the final assault that captured the last 2 redoubts outside of Yorktown, Virginia, at the end of the war. After the war, after he had already served as the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury, Hamilton actually rose to the rank of General-in-Chief of the United States Army after George Washington stepped down from that position. Well, Hamilton had multiple children and grandchildren, but it's the grandchildren through one of his sons that I want to focus on for the purposes of this video. His son, John Church Hamilton, who was born while he was Secretary of the Treasury. Now, John Church Hamilton had a number of children, but there are 3 in particular I want to talk about. One of those is a namesake of his grandfather, and that was Alexander Hamilton, who rose to the rank of Major General of New York Militia during the American Civil War. He had used gas balloons for military observation, and that was part of why he got the rank that he did. He also led troops during the New York draft riots. His brother, Schuyler Hamilton, named after their grandmother's maiden name, he had been wounded twice during the Mexican-American War, served on the staff of Benjamin Butler and on the staff of General Scott during the early parts of the American Civil War. He was also a friend of General Sherman. He eventually rose to the rank of Brigadier General and even was appointed to the rank of Major General, but ended up resigning his commission before he was actually confirmed for that rank. Now, Alexander and Schuyler had a sister named Elizabeth Hamilton, and she is best known as the wife of Union General-in-Chief Henry Halleck. Well, that's it for this particular look at those connections between the American Revolution and the American Civil War. As I said at the beginning, there are countless others I could have touched on, so much more depth to this topic than what we could handle in 16 or 17 minutes in a YouTube video. But that gives you a little bit of a look into those connections that exist. You may see more videos like this in the future. This video was brought to you courtesy of a request from Avenir Dutch, who is one of the patrons of this channel. If you're interested in becoming a patron yourself and supporting this channel, but also maybe having the opportunity to request a video like this on a topic of your choosing, you can click on the link in the description below to go to the Patreon page. But most importantly, if you would just hit that like, that thumbs up button, hit that little bell to get notification whenever new videos are posted to this channel. And most importantly, please subscribe. Thank you guys so much. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Anything maybe that you'd like to add to what I've already said, any discussion you want to have. And you can click on the link for the Discord server as well. And that's a great place to have those discussions in a more detailed way. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this, and we will see you again real soon.